Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take another look at Star Wars X-Wing. When I first started this, I made a crap ton of mistakes. I wasn't familiar with the genre at all. I really don't do miniatures, but I love Star Wars and I love Star Trek. So Star Wars X-Wing and Star Trek Attack Wing, it took a little doing, but I managed to convince myself to buy it, and I'm not sorry I did. But again, I've made a ton of mistakes learning how to play this game, and I'm sure that some of you may be able to relate. This game can be a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of different rules to consider, a lot of different ships, a lot of special abilities going on, and to that end, I compiled a list of common beginner mistakes that might help some of you guys out, for those of you that are new to the game. There's about 15 of them, so we'll just jump right into it. I have my Rebel set and my Imperial set ready to illustrate, so without further ado, let's start with number 1. The first thing I'd like to go over is range and how it affects how many dice an attacker or defender gets depending on the circumstances. In general, when an attacker is attacking at range 1, they get an extra attack die. If the attacker is attacking at range 3, then the defender gets an extra defense die. This rule only occurs whenever the attacker is using his primary weapon. If there is a secondary weapon involved, like proton torpedoes, then the range rule is ignored. Just to quickly illustrate what that looks like, I have an X-Wing and a TIE Fighter set up here, and as you can see, they are at range 3. Now, let's say it's the X-Wing's turn to fire, and the X-Wing goes ahead and uses his primary weapon. At range 3, the TIE Fighter would get an extra defense die. By default, he already has 3 agility, so he would get 3 normal defense die, plus an extra 1 for being at range 3. However, let's say that the X-Wing decides not to use his primary weapon for the attack. Let's say he has a Proton Torpedoes card, which allows him to fire at range 2 to 3. Proton Torpedoes are a secondary weapon, thus the range rule would not apply. In this particular instance, the attacker would get 4 attack dice based on what the card says, and the defender would only get 3 defense die instead of 4. Just to quickly show you that again, I have the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter set up here, but as you can see, they are pretty close together. They are at range 1. So let's just say that it is the X-Wing's turn, and if he decides to use his primary weapon, that would be 3 attack dice, his attack strength is 3, plus he would get an extra 1 for being at range 1. So in effect, he would get 4 attack dice if he used his primary weapon. If he decided to use his secondary weapon, let's say he had an advanced Proton Torpedoes card equipped, that is range 1, so that could be used here, and there's 5 attack dice involved with that. So if he decides to go with that, he would get an additional attack dice. Again, if he had the Proton Torpedoes card here, that says range 2 to 3, and he would not be able to use that. But he could use the advanced Proton Torpedoes if he had that equipped instead. Number 2, is it an action or not? In most cases, the cards will simply say whether or not it's an action, so my best advice to you is to read the card. For example, Squad Leader, Expose, and Marksmanship all have the word action. Let's see if I can focus in on that. They all have the word action listed right on the card. It's even bolded so you can clearly see it. This means that you have to spend an action in order to use it, in most cases. So let's say Wedge Antilles here had the marksmanship ability, which has that word action listed on it. He would have a choice during the activation phase. He could use a focus action, a target lock action, or the marksmanship action. Some cards don't have anything on them, so you can use those as a passive ability. For example, you've got Predator here, which has no action word bolded right on it. Same thing with Opportunist here. You just simply observe this passive ability and use it as the situation warrants it. Same thing with pilot abilities. For example, Wedge Antilles, when attacking, reduce the defender's agility value by 1 to a minimum of 0. There's no action here. There's no special thing that has to be used in order to make use of this ability. It's just a passive ability that is always considered whenever the situation warrants it. So in answer to the quick question, is it an action or not, read the card. Number 3, pilot skill. Pilot skill is very important to X-Wing because it determines a number of different things throughout the course of a particular turn. During the activation phase, for example, pilots will resolve their movement and their actions from lowest to highest, meaning that the pilot with the lowest skill will move first and activate their ability first if they can, then the next lowest will move and activate, and so on and so forth. During the combat phase, it's reversed. The pilot with the highest skill will get to shoot first, and this can mean the difference between winning or losing the match, especially if there's like 2 ships left on the battlefield, and the first ship can get a hit in and destroy the other ship before the other ship even gets a chance to fire back. So yeah, pilot skill is very important in X-Wing. To illustrate that, I have a B-Wing and a TIE Bomber set up here. As you can see, they are not within range of one another, and they are both equipped with proton torpedoes. Now let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that the B-Wing has the lower pilot skill. So he would get to move first and activate his ability as appropriate. Let's just say that when he revealed his maneuver dial, he moved 1 straight ahead. I don't remember if the B-Wing can do that on their maneuver dial, but I'm just going to roll with it for example purposes. So I'm going to eyeball it, 1 straight ahead, whatever. So now the B-Wing has moved, and now he's going to want to use a target lock to try and fire these proton torpedoes. So to do that, he's going to go ahead and measure the distance, and unfortunately he's still not close enough to do that. So at best, he could use a focus or a barrel roll action. So let's just say that he decides to take a focus action, whatever. So now the TIE Bomber, who has the higher pilot skill, will get to move next. The TIE Bomber also decides to move straight ahead. Let's say he moves ahead, I don't know, 2 or 1. Again, I don't know if the TIE Bomber can do that, but you get the idea. So let's just say the TIE Bomber moves up like that. And now he has proton torpedoes as well. So he's going to go ahead and measure the range. And it just so happens that he is within range 3 of the B-Wing here. So he could perform a target lock action so that he can fire his proton torpedoes on the next phase, the combat phase. Had the TIE Bomber moved first, the TIE Bomber would not have gotten a target lock on the B-Wing, depending on his movement, and thus the B-Wing would have been able to then acquire a target lock. So again, pilot skill, depending on who's going first and who's going second, can really have an impact on how the combat phase plays out. So what we have in this example is an A-Wing and a TIE Bomber. And let's just say that the A-Wing really wants to K-turn behind the TIE Bomber. But whether or not he's going to be successful is determined by the pilot's skill, as you'll see here in a minute. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the A-Wing had the lower skill, meaning that he would move first. And let's say he reveals a 5 K-turn on his maneuver dial. Now, as you can see here, the A-Wing is going to be moving up, and the template actually overlaps the TIE Bomber. So per the collision rules, the A-Wing has to stop, get a stress token, and take no action. So that's bad news for the A-Wing, especially if the TIE Bomber decides to do a K-turn of his own or do something really nasty. So that would actually be it for the A-Wing. No K-turn possible. So let's see what would happen if the K-turn was done after the TIE Bomber had moved. Let's just say now that the TIE Bomber has the lower pilot skill, and because of that, he would move first during the activation phase. So let's say the TIE Bomber opts to move 1 or 2 up. He does a target lock or a focus action, whatever he wants to. And now the A-Wing gets to move next because he has the higher pilot skill. Now the A-Wing is free to K-turn without running into him. The A-Wing, of course, would get a stress token for performing the K-turn. However, as you can see, he's in a very good position. Number 4, target locks don't have to be used just for proton torpedoes and other secondary weapons. Target locks can be spent to re-roll a certain number of attack dice. So let's say that the X-Wing here used his primary weapon against the TIE Interceptor at range 1. Because of that, he would get 3 attack dice plus 1 for being at range 1. But his roll was terrible. He only has 1 hit here, and he has 3 blanks. And unfortunately, it's a really bad roll considering the circumstances. So he's going to go ahead and spend his target lock to re-roll any number of attack dice he wants to. So he's going to take these 3 blank ones, re-roll them, and hope for something better. Let's say he re-rolls them, gets a hit, and another hit, and a critical. Now, the results of these dice are much better, and the TIE Interceptor is, well, in trouble. Number 5 and number 6 are relatively the same, so I'm going to cover them at the same time. Number 5, when attacking, the defender resolves their abilities before the attacker does, if they have any to resolve. Same thing with number 6. When defending, the attacker resolves their abilities first, if they have any to use. So just to give you a little bit of an example here, I have the Millennium Falcon set up, a TIE Interceptor here. The TIE Interceptor has a focus token, and the Millennium Falcon here has the elusiveness ability. Now, for example purposes, let's just say that the TIE Interceptor just rolled his attack dice and got 2 blanks, a hit, and a focus. And his plan was he was going to use his focus token to change this focus die into a hit. But before he does that, he has to let the defender resolve any abilities if he wants to use them. In this case, the defender wants to use elusiveness. When defending, you may receive 1 stress token to choose 1 attack die. The attacker must re-roll that die. So let's just say he goes ahead and accepts a stress token to use elusiveness. He keeps the card, mind you. And you only discard cards when you're using like secondary weapons or whatever. But anyway, let's just say he decides to use elusiveness and tells the attacker to re-roll this hit. Now let's say that the attacker rolls this die and gets a focus. Okay. Now the attacker is free to spend a focus token to adjust the results as necessary. So these 2 focus, he's going to use the focus and switch these right back into hits. Sometimes this elusiveness ability can be helpful. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the TIE Defender here, or the TIE Interceptor, rolled 1 hit and 3 blanks. And let's say he had elusiveness, no stress. And let's say that he decides to use elusiveness, takes the stress, tells him to reroll this hit. Let's just say the TIE Interceptor rolls this as a focus. Now he has a choice. I can either do 0 hits on the Millennium Falcon, or I can spend my focus token, which I wouldn't have spent before, to make this back into a hit again. So elusiveness does have some usefulness depending on the circumstances. Number 7, initiative. Whenever you're building your squad, you'll end up with a certain number of squad points, and whoever has the lower squad point total will be said to have initiative. If you're tied for squad points, then the Imperial player has the initiative. The player with initiative gets to move first and shoot first if if facing a ship of equal pilot skill. So if both of these ships here have a pilot skill of 8, whoever had initiative would move first and then shoot first during the 2 separate phases. So during the activation phase, let's say the Imperial player had the initiative, he would get to move first and the X-Wing would get to move after that. During the combat phase, the Imperial player would get to shoot first, and then the X-Wing player could shoot back. Now, there is something called the simultaneous attack rule. Whenever this occurs, where you have 2 ships of equal pilot skill attacking one another, if the TIE Interceptor, because he has initiative, manages to destroy the X-Wing or do enough damage to kill him, then the X-Wing player, per the simultaneous attack rule, before he was removed from the board, he would be allowed to shoot back. And if it just so happens that he also destroys the TIE Interceptor in the process, then both ships would get removed from the board. Number 8, ship collisions. Pretty simple. One of 2 things will happen. Either the moving ship will land on another small or large ship's base, or they won't. If they do land on top of another ship's base, small or large, then there is going to be a collision. If they do not land on a small or large ship's base, then they would have assumed to have moved through it, and the pilot would have had time to either go above or below the said ship in question. Huge ships like your Corellian corvettes and your medium transports, they observe a different collision rule, which I won't get into here. So in this particular instance, we have a TIE Advanced, and I have 2 different maneuvers set up. I have a 1 slight turn and a 3 hard banker turn here. If we do the 1 slight turn, he'll end up with his base on top of the Z95 Headhunter leg, so that will result in a collision. If that were to occur, he would have to move along this path as best he can and then stop where they collide, like this. Whenever this collision happens, he forfeits his action, and that's basically it. He can't do like focus or target lock because that action would have been forfeited. If he had done a 3 hard turn instead, even though it looks like along this path he's colliding with the Z95 Headhunter, he's really not. And the TIE Advanced, he clears the Z95 and would have either moved above or below the ship to avoid a collision. In this case, the TIE Advanced is free to make an action, assuming he's not stressed. Now, there is a special circumstance when you're doing a K-turn. Let's say the TIE Advanced wants to do a 4K turn to try and get behind the Z95 Headhunter. And let's measure it to make sure I'm good. Let's put that here. Okay. So let's say that the TIE Advanced reveals his maneuver dial and wants to do a 4K turn, which is a red maneuver. But as you can see, when he goes to use the template, he doesn't clear the Z95. He ends up like right smack in the middle of the base there. So what happens is this 4K turn turns into a 4 straight maneuver of the same color. So it'll be a 4 red straight maneuver. So he'll go as close as he can, like so, to the base. He'll stop there. This will be a 4 straight red maneuver. And because of that, he still receives a stress token. Even though he didn't get a chance to turn around, he still received that stress token. And likewise, the TIE Advance would not be able to take an action. Just as a quick note, ships that are colliding like this or touching cannot attack one another. Number 9, collision with obstacles. Well, it's sort of similar to collision with ships, but there are some different rules to consider. Whenever the ship's base or the maneuver template touches the obstacle in question, a collision occurs. So even while in this example, this Lambda-class shuttle would end up here, not on top of the obstacle, the maneuver template is still touching it. So that would still result in a collision. Whenever that occurs, the mover has to roll 1 attack die. On a hit or a critical, they have to resolve it appropriately. So if they get a hit, they get a damage. If they get a critical hit, they get a critical damage and have to resolve it as appropriate. Another thing to look at, whenever you land on top of an obstacle, let's say he didn't do that and moved maybe 1 straight, I don't know, whatever. He's on top of the obstacle right now. Whenever that happens and a ship is on top of an obstacle, they cannot attack, however they can be attacked. So that's an important distinction there. Finally, another thing to note about obstacles, and it's just a side note for those of you, who want to learn a little bit about the intricacies of this game. Whenever you're shooting through an obstacle, like so, closest space to closest space, whenever you're measuring range, in this case, it'd be something like this. Let's say the shuttle was attacking the Z95. They're at range 2, and the Lambda would get, looks like 3 attack dice there. But because the Lambda-class shuttle was shooting through an obstacle, the defender would get an additional defense die. One final thing to note about collision with obstacles. In the case of a K-turn, the instructions say to resolve the maneuver as normal. So even though with a ship you have to turn that 4K turn into a straight 4 maneuver of the same color, with obstacles you don't have to do that. You can still initiate the K-turn should you land on top of it. However, you will receive a stress for that red maneuver, and on top of that you wouldn't get to take an action and would have to roll for damage appropriately. Number 10, forgetting to take actions. And I admit I'm guilty of this from time to time. In this particular example, we have a TIE Defender bearing down on this E-wing here. And during the activation phase, the TIE Defender took a focus action, whereas during the activation phase, the E-wing forgot to take an action. So the TIE Defender has rolled their attack dice. Let's say they attacked first in the combat phase, and they rolled, and they got a hit and a focus. Well, the TIE Defender is going to go ahead and spend the focus token to switch this to a hit. And now the Defender went ahead and rolled his defense die. He's got an evade and a focus. Now, had the E-wing remembered to take an action, he could have negated that 1 damage. Right now it's 2 to 1. 2 hits to 1 evade. If he had taken an evade token, then he could have canceled out that 2nd damage by using this in conjunction with this evade roll. Had he taken a focus action, he could have traded this focus token in to turn this focus roll into an evade and negated that extra damage. So because the E-wing forgot to take an action, he suffered 1 damage. So moral of the story, don't rush. Just take your if you're new to the game, take your time and remember to take actions because you may need them. Number 11. You cannot perform the same action twice on the same turn. However, if you have more than one token and you can use it, you can spend them. You can spend as many tokens as you want. Allow me to illustrate. Darth Vader, his pilot ability allows him to take 2 actions on a turn. He could not, per this rule, take 2 focus actions or 2 evade actions. He couldn't do it. However, he could take a focus and an evade, and then use them throughout the turn. There are some situations, however, where a player may receive more than one of the same token. In the case of Kyle Katarn here in the Hawk 290, I think it is, he has the Recon Specialist ability, or upgrade. When you perform a focus action, assign 1 additional focus token to your ship. So there are some cards and some abilities that may allow a particular ship to end up with more than one of the same token. So if he takes the focus action, he'll end up with 2 focus tokens. He could use 1 for attack and 1 for defense. Again, there's no limit to how many you can spend, just how many actions you can take on your turn and whether or not they are the same action. Number 12, resolving critical hits. As a general rule, hits are resolved before critical hits. So in this particular example, we have an A-Wing bearing down on this TIE Phantom here. The A-Wing has done 2 hits and a critical, and the TIE Phantom here, this bad roll, rolled 2 blanks. He has 2 shields remaining to him. Normally these would be on the pilot card, but I'm using this for illustration purposes. What will happen here is the hits will get resolved first. So these 2 hits would end up hitting the shields and taking them out. And finally, you're left with the critical hit. That is then resolved, and the player here, the TIE Phantom, would receive a face-up damage card. Just to show you a slightly different example with a different outcome, we've got the A-Wing here and the TIE Phantom still. The A-Wing has rolled a hit and a critical, and the defender has rolled 1 evade and has 2 shields. Again, these shields would normally be on the pilot card, but help to illustrate the point. So what will happen is the hits will get resolved before the critical. So this evade here, this evade roll, will cancel out the hit. So these go away. That leaves us with this critical hit here. Now, whenever a critical hit hits shields, nothing special happens. It just simply eliminates the shields and that's it. The defender doesn't have to draw any sort of damage card, face-up damage card, or anything like that. So against shields, criticals do nothing different than regular hits do. The exception to this are proton bombs. There may be a few others, but this one sticks out to me. Proton bombs will bypass shields because on their card it states that the defender, or whoever gets hit by them, has to draw a face-up damage card. It doesn't say anything about taking a critical hit. It instructs the player to draw a face-up damage card. So that would negate these 2 shields altogether and force whoever got hit to take a face-up damage card rather than simply losing a shield. Number 13, while some ships have a 360-degree primary weapon firing arc, they also have a secondary weapon firing arc that must be observed when using secondary weapons. It's called an auxiliary firing arc. In the case of the Millennium Falcon here, see if I can just take this off gently. There we go. Just put that down. Okay, so if we look at this base really quick, there's an arrow going around the middle of the base. That is for the primary weapon. The primary firing arc is here 360 degrees, meaning it can shoot in any direction. However, there is an auxiliary firing arc right here for the secondary weapon. So if this thing, Millennium Falcon, wants to shoot concussion missiles or something, it'll have to observe this forward arc here. Now the Slave 1 is somewhat similar. You've got a primary firing arc here. So it can shoot both concussion missiles or lasers right out the front here. But there's also an auxiliary firing arc out along the back here. This is for the primary weapon. However, the secondary weapons can't be fired in this particular direction. Now, whenever you're dealing with abilities like Backstabbers or Outmaneuver, for those of you not familiar with Backstabber, Backstabber is a TIE fighter pilot that will basically give the TIE fighter an additional attack die should they shoot at someone outside of their firing arc, out of the defender's firing arc. So let's see if I can get this TIE fighter. I don't have a base for it set up right now, but let's say this backstabber pilot was back here behind the Millennium Falcon. And as I said, the Millennium Falcon has a 360-degree firing arc. So on its turn, it could shoot at the TIE fighter if it wanted to. However, in terms of the backstabber ability, that only applies to the auxiliary forward firing arc here, in which case the backstabber ability would kick in and backstabber would get that extra attack dice. Even though the primary weapon fires in 360, there is still a forward firing arc that the TIE fighter is currently outside of. Number 14, ion tokens. Ion weapons are generally there to disable or control enemy ships. They don't do a lot of damage, but they can force their opponents or their targets into a very nasty situation for the next round because they really can't move very much. Whenever a ship is afflicted with an ion token, a small ship for that matter, the ship on the next round must move one straight ahead, and it must be a white maneuver. Even if they are capable on their maneuver dial of moving one straight ahead that is a green maneuver. They have to observe a one white straight maneuver. In this particular instance, this TIE Phantom here is afflicted with a ion cannon from the last round, and during the activation phase they would move one straight ahead and then discard the ion token. They would still get to perform actions as normal and attack as normal, but they are forced into moving one straight ahead. Again, that is a white maneuver. If they were stressed from the previous round, it would be a white maneuver, so he would stay stressed and not be able to take an action. Large ships, on the other hand, require 2 of these ion tokens in order for them to observe that roll for the next round. They need 2 ion tokens. If they happen to be afflicted with 2 ion tokens on the next round, they'll move one straight ahead. That is also a white maneuver, and they'll remove the ion tokens as appropriate, take actions, assuming they're not stressed, do combat, and so on and so forth. Last but not least, we have number 15, and this is geared more toward experienced players that are trying to teach newcomers how to play the game. I get this question off and on from other people on my YouTube forum. How would you go about teaching a newcomer how to play the game? If it were me, and you are free to do whatever you want, so let me just put that out there right now. This is not gospel or anything like that. If I were to teach someone how to play this game, I would start out bare bones small. I mean, I'm talking small. The 2 TIE fighters and the X-Wing that the core game came with will work fine. Take that a step further. Use only your rookie pilots or your Alpha Squadron pilots, the ships that do not have any sort of special ability. It doesn't matter if the squad points equal or not. This is just a learning game, and balance really shouldn't matter right now. Your main goal for teaching someone how to play is going to be first teaching them how the turns play out, how the activation phase plays out, how the combat phase plays out, what pilot skill has to do with either of those 2 phases. Once you manage to get a handle on how the turns play out, then you can start adding in more ships and more upgrades. But yeah, right now I would stick with for 1 X-Wing, I would go with that's the Imperial deck. Like, I would go with the rookie pilot. That's only 21 points. So, I mean, granted, they're kind of, crappy when it comes to abilities, but that's the whole point. You're trying to make it as simple as possible for your newcomer. And as far as the Imperial player goes, whoever ends up being them, if you have a TIE fighter or a TIE Interceptor, you could use the Alpha Squadron pilot. If you have, let's see, TIE Bombers, the Scimitar Squadron pilot, there's no special ability on that guy. TIE Fighters, you've got your Academy pilot, pilot skill 1, only worth 12. Those don't have any sort of special abilities. So yeah, your no-named pilots are what you're going to want to go with whenever you're first teaching someone how to play. And like I said, once they get a handle on general gameplay, then start adding in an upgrade card or 2. Start with 1 upgrade card. You don't have to introduce a whole bunch all at once. Do, say, 1 proton torpedo. If I can, yeah, 1 proton torpedo, attach that to the X-Wing, boom, done. Even though he might have an elite symbol on his ship, just do 1 upgrade card. Keep it simple and as easy as you can, because you don't want to bombard them with all of these cards all at once. They'll get frustrated and probably walk away. Some might like it, others others are going to go, this is way too nuts for me, forget it. So yeah, start with 1 or 2 upgrade cards. Instead of doing 1 or 2 upgrade cards Instead, choose a pilot with a special ability. Play with that for a while, and then introduce an upgrade. Once they get comfortable enough, then start adding more ships to the fray. The more ships you add, the more chaotic it's going to get, and it becomes harder to teach at that point. So that's how I would teach a newcomer. Again, if you have any questions or have any other things to add to that, feel free to leave a comment below. And there you have it. Hopefully you found this video informative and enjoyable. It's worth noting I didn't cover everything in the manual. I'm sure there's more tips out there. Along those lines, if you have anything you'd like to contribute, feel free to leave a comment in the below description. If I get enough of them, maybe I'll do a second video. Who knows? Again, going back to just learning how to play this game and the last tip, my advice is take it slow, don't get frustrated. There's no rush to go out there and play a 150-point game. Play it at your own pace. There are so many abilities and so many upgrades, and that's what actually makes this game enjoyable to me, just the amount of customization. But there are so many different abilities and so many different cards. This deck alone, this is all Imperial, just all Imperial pilots. I've got a separate Rebel deck. The upgrade cards stacks this high. I've got more in the box. I mean, there's a lot. So yeah, don't try and take it on all at once. Start with a few ships, get used to them. Do a few more ships, get used to them. And then add more abilities. You don't have to mix and match all at once and then frustrate yourself trying to figure out how to resolve something. But anyway, I digress. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know. Leave comments in the below description. You can check out my official website, www.dadsgamingaddiction.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. This is Vince, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.